Gilbert King, hello, it's great to see you.
Good to see you, Maggie.
I just finished listening to season 2, and I did not think it was possible to be better or equal to 1. I wouldn't say better, but it is absolutely fantastic. And I have to say, it is the most perfect epilogue to season 1. I don't think I would have wanted to hear something different.
That's really nice. I don't know what to say to that, but yeah.
Well, I know you guys struggled a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Season
we
2s are
did.
very difficult to make.
Yeah, it is. And you're trying to figure out what do people already know and what don't they know and why is this even worth doing? Does it just seem like we're tagging on a bunch of bonus episodes?
Right.
You know, but thanks for saying that because it didn't come together easily. That's for sure.
Absolutely. So I can feel the heart and care for these characters, and I do want to talk about that a bit. But the first thing that is on most people's minds is, how is Leo? What is his condition? How is he?
Yeah. Well, Leo got in a really bad motorcycle accident in January, and he was confined to a bed for 3 months. Couldn't get out. Couldn't bear weight. And it was pretty bad. He broke a lot of bones, his back, torn bladder, and it was horrific injuries. And his daughter was riding on back, and she had some pretty severe injuries too. And so I was just down there recently, and he's finally out of bed, and he can get into a wheelchair now. He's still got some leg issues that he's trying to deal with. But overall, I would say he's markedly improved. His mood is much better because he can get out. He can actually drive a car now. He's got one good leg. And so he's able to do that, and that makes a big difference psychologically.
Right.
And so he's healing. He didn't think he would play guitar again. His wrists were just completely smashed. He's had 6 surgeries on his hands. But he was playing guitar. He's still got a cast on. He's still got some more surgeries
Saw a
ahead.
picture with the cast and him holding.
Yeah, so he's like, that makes a big difference psychologically. So I think he's really made really solid strides to getting back to normal, even though I doubt he'll ever be fully 100%.
You didn't really feature his daughter in this season. Was there a reason for that?
No, not really. It's just like she just didn't really have a role in this. Chrissy was just barely in it too.
Right.
We sort of just pivoted away from Leo a little bit, more into the other side, Jeremy's side. And so it sort of limited the amount of people we could really concentrate on. It would be nice to give some more updates on the whole, Bone Valley universe, I guess you'd say. And we may do that at some point soon. But this time we were just trying to be as tightly focused on Jeremy in this part of the story.
So listeners also really want to know about Jeremy and Leo's relationship now.
Yeah.
Did they keep one? Have they spoken again?
They have not spoken again yet. It's interesting. It's just a very difficult thing for Leo to do. And that's why I think it really worked well, is that it was so spontaneous. Jeremy had called me, and I just happened to be standing there with Leo, and I just spontaneously said, "Do you guys want to talk?" And they did. But I'm not sure Leo would, reach out to Jeremy and want to have further conversations with him. I think he'd be happy to meet with him, but it's just not something. With Jeremy in prison, he's back in solitary confinement, and Leo's still struggling with health a little bit. We haven't even been thinking about that, but at some point, because Leo went through that CTP program, the transition program, he is able to go into prisons again. And so he can actually visit Jeremy. And he said he wants to do that sometime.
He does.
Yeah, he does. And Jeremy specifically said, I hope someday I can sit face to face with Leo and apologize for what I've done. And I think they would both get something out of that experience. I know both of them would. And so I think it will happen at some point. But right now, there's just too much going on between both of them.
When we last heard from Jeremy, he was writing with Justin, and he was wanting to do better. He was not in the hole at that time. He was out, and now he's back.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what happened?
What it is he got transferred back to a facility where he'd been several years ago and where he had some incidents, including the stabbing incident. And so he went back there, and there were some people there that had grudges, and he didn't feel safe there. I think at one point he'd gotten into a fight with an inmate. It wasn't really much of a fight. Jeremy told me the guy just beat him up.
Yeah.
And so he sort of requested that he go back into solitary. He felt safer there. And, Jeremy's not the most, I don't know how to describe this, but he's not the most thoughtful person when it comes to how do I protect myself and get back in. And so he ended up having a conversation with an authority, and they said, well, it's not that easy. And then he just said, well, I'll hurt somebody and get back in. And by saying that, he got back in. So he's back in CM2. And so I don't know. He's not really able to have visitors until he gets another move up in the stratosphere of CMs. But I think they are still writing to each other. And they do want to meet, Jeremy and his son, Justin. They do want to meet. It's just Jeremy makes it a little difficult sometimes with his behavior in the prisons.
Yeah, where is Justin's thought process at this moment?
I think Justin's also he just moved, he changed jobs, he's got a new family, a new child. And so he's been a little bit like, this is my priority right now. But he told me, look, it's going to start clearing up right around now, and I want to start revisiting this again. So I think he will get back into it. And he's been writing, but he hasn't really made an effort to get up there yet. And he needs me for that, and I want to be there for that too.
I really I haven't listened to any other podcast where, without beating you over the head with it, we're exploring male emotions and these things that men don't often talk about, and hearing Jeremy, this like big tough guy, prisoner, murderer, talk about these very intimate things. Can you just tell me a bit about your thought process when you guys decided to leave so much of that in?
Yeah. It's just, these are the kind of conversations I tended to have with him. Mm-hmm. He didn't really try to pull the tough guy routine with me. He sounded very broken early in the beginning when I started talking to him. He was just always in a really bad place. Just bad things were happening to him. And I think the marked difference I noticed is when I started sending him books, and he wanted to talk about the books he was reading. And, he read a lot of Westerns and some James Patterson, Stephen King kind of stuff. But I would send him, books that my kids were reading back in the day, like Game of Thrones and Hunger Games and things like that, just because I thought something more modern, and I was familiar with these stories. And he talked about them in a way like, he really lamented the way the author was killing off the characters in Game of Thrones, and how much he liked, the adventure part of Hunger Games. And I just felt like he was talking to me differently than he was in the beginning. And he would get emotional about things, and he would show this kind of empathy. And then he started speaking about his remorse and his great, regrets in life, disappointing his family. And that's the way I've always talked with Leo. We talked about those kind of things, and he just fell right into it. And I didn't feel like I was forcing him to talk about more sensitive things. They're really coming from him, and I really enjoyed hearing that side of him for some reason. It just made me see a different side of him. There were stories he would tell about his childhood sometimes that were just like made him laugh, and you would just have these recollections that maybe he hadn't thought about in a while. And just to hear somebody in those dire conditions laugh about something, a memory, really moved me emotionally. And so when he was willing to explore that, I just kept going there. And I don't regret it at all. There's times where I get really emotional. You can hear me, and especially talking to Justin, where you can hear me kind of sniffling in the background. But that's just the way we roll.
I know. I'm about to cry when thinking about at the end where he says he'll claim his body.
Yeah.
That talking about death in prison is something, and this brings me to the next thing I want to talk to you about. When I was doing the Suave podcast, that was one of the first things Suave said when you get to prison is they ask you, where do you want your body sent? And so then to hear Jeremy talking about something that I knew was something they ask, and he's been thinking about that.
Yeah. And I think it's really bad for him because he's lost touch with his family.
Yeah.
And so for like over a decade, he just hasn't had any correspondence. He didn't know where they were. Like he couldn't get anything from them. So I was giving him updates. And I think by talking about the people in his past, he was thinking about those connections again. And the idea of being, buried in that prison cemetery up there, it's a pretty dismal place. I mean, literally they have, the prison's license plate tag prints up your name, your date of death, and your prison number, and that's it. And they're just out in the field, and it's just not really well maintained, and there's no flowers there. And I don't know what he's seen or heard of it.
It's like a potter's field, kind of.
Yeah, it is a potter's field. And I just think the idea of just not being able to get out of that prison, even in death, just really depressed him. And he was talking about it a lot. And so then to hear Justin say, "I'll claim him," that kind of blew me away. I wasn't even expecting that.
So how do you navigate that line between your emotional involvement with these people and being able to tell the story objectively? I don't think do you consider yourself a journalist?
Not really. I mean,
Okay.
I use journalism
Sure.
in it, but I never came up from that background.
Right.
So, I was just thinking about this just yesterday because, like, I don't know, like, I sent Jeremy books. And I don't know if, like, if I worked for a journal, like a newspaper like the New York Times, I'd be allowed to do that.
You would not be allowed to do
Right.
that.
I was like, that was a groundbreaking thing that enabled me to develop this sort of, compassion, but also just this bond with Jeremy over books. And it kind of fit perfectly. I mean, I'm a writer, like, let's talk about books. And we talked about that. And I just feel like it opened up a great, and I would hate to not have that tool in my toolbox to do this kind of things. And so, like, I don't know. I feel like as long as I'm sort of being honest with the subject, being honest with myself, and trying to respect listeners, you don't want to be like, hey, I'm also trying to get Jeremy out of prison. That's my goal here. Nobody wants Jeremy out of prison. He can't get out of prison. He's too violent. He has no self-control. He's not someone you want out there. But then I just thought, well, what's the best thing you can hope for from Jeremy? And even if I was a prosecutor, I think the same answer would be, that he just admits to what he did and maybe tries to ease the suffering of the victims and the families of victims that he's hurt. That's about the best you can hope for him. And that's what he was doing. And so, to me, it was like a win-win. I've gotten letters from people in the Florida corrections, high-level people, that have told me that you have no idea how good this is for the entire system. To show that, to establish connections with family, it's one of the most important things for prisoners. So we thank you. And I was like, I didn't expect to get that from the.
No, that's really interesting, actually. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? So when you were helping Jeremy connect with family, they said to you, this is good for everyone.
Well, they came out to me after they heard the podcast.
Okay.
And one of the guys wrote me a letter. And in fact, he said, I was the one that set up the field mission program in the Florida Department of Corrections. So I knew who Leo was. And I just want to say, like, I listened to your podcast, and like that, what you're doing by bringing families closer together, it improves behavior of people like Jeremy. And he was like thankful for it. And, I ended up talking to Leo about it. And Leo says, I know that guy. Like, it's amazing. Like, this guy, I can't believe he wrote you that letter.
Wow.
And so, so I always felt like we were doing this conscientiously. We're not trying to expose the prisons as being, these horrible, violent places. That's part of the story. But we're showing another side to it where, someone's trying to get some kind of redemption and turn his life around in a positive way. And that can never be a bad thing.
Absolutely. So people want to know, is the state of Florida ever going to admit its wrongdoing in this? Do you think they're moving?
I do believe that they will, as a general state, will admit that they got this wrong. I don't think the circuit where this case took place, I don't think they'll ever admit they got it wrong. But I do think that, there's some powerful people in Leo's corner that are pushing for this. And I've gone through this before in Florida when I wrote Devil in the Grove. I felt the momentum build, and I felt politicians saying, we got to fix this. This is just embarrassing. And I think Leo's case is similar. I mean, anyone who looks into it, you know pretty much that you got the wrong guy and that he should never have been convicted, but he did get convicted, but that needs to be corrected. And I have high confidence that this is going to happen. I don't know when. I don't know if it'll be with the same governor. I don't know how it's going to look, but I have no doubt that this is going to happen. And just because I think Florida understands, unlike a lot of other states, Florida understands that the integrity of the criminal justice system is also at play. And it improves the integrity by addressing these past injustices. To just say, you know what, that was wrong. We got that wrong. We're not just going to sweep it under a rug and not admit we blew it. Let's just be honest about this. And I've seen them do it in the past. And so I have confidence that it's going to happen again.
This isn't necessarily like on record or whatever,
Sure.
but that's interesting about Florida because I feel like we never often cover innocence cases from there. And that makes me think that they're not really being proactive. Like, I don't know too many innocence cases down there that are high,
It's not that easy. I shouldn't really separate it so much, but I've seen it happen in the past. Exonerations coming out of Florida and admitting they got it wrong. And to me, that's what I'm clinging to. Like, okay. I've seen this happen in the past. I've been involved with some of them in the past, but there are some really tricky innocence cases down there. If you talk to Seth Miller at the Innocence Project, he could probably tell you about how frustrating the state is. But I'm only mostly looking through the lens of the cases I get involved in. And I do expect some kind of, movement on this.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, when I think of states with, like, mass exonerations, I'm thinking, like, Michigan. You see all the guys in Michigan and Chicago. I didn't think Florida was doing so much.
No, they're doing individual cases. Okay. I think, in the cases I look at in Florida, for the most part, and this is a generalization, but I think it's more like one prosecutor's office. It's not like the police. I mean, granted, there are those kind of cases out there, but in the cases I've looked at, it seems to be the prosecutor's office who are really fighting for that conviction and maybe willing to bend some ethical rules to get there. Whereas, even in the Leo's case, like, I don't think the police did a really bad job on it. I think they were, they didn't have the manpower they needed, and there was a lot of unsolved murders happening, a lot of administrative complications. But I think mostly they did a pretty good job, and they couldn't solve the case. And that's when the prosecutor came in and said, "I'll fix it." And that's when everything started to change. All the evidence suddenly got beautiful, and that the police after 16 months couldn't put that together. But prosecutor comes in, and all of a sudden the case changes.
Yep.
I know what happened there.
Yep. Yep. No, we can talk about that when we talk about Graves County.
Yes.
But so there was a moment in episode 4 for me where it clicked, and in my head I went, wow, this exact moment, it was when you were realizing that there were other people Jeremy had murdered. And for me, it was so clear in that moment that this is why we have to get it right away and convict the right person. Were you intending to show that? Because that's what I got was if Leo was not convicted, if this case stayed open and they pursued the right person, would these other people have died?
Yeah, I don't think so. And I honestly, they had Jeremy Scott's fingerprints in Michelle's car, right after the murder. And there was a detective with the Polk County Sheriff's Office who investigated Jeremy for a prior murder about a year and a half earlier, and he got acquitted on it. So he knew that Jeremy was back on the streets in this part of Lakeland where Michelle disappeared, right there. Why don't you take those unidentified fingerprints and just manually compare them to known violent suspects in the area? That would have led you right to Jeremy, and that would have been the end of it right there. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. So he goes on to kill Michelle, doesn't get caught. 6 weeks later, he kills a cab driver, doesn't get caught. And a year after that, he kills another man in Lakeland. And then through this investigation, I'm meeting the family members of these, the victims, and it's just heartbreaking to see the trauma that they carry, and none
of it needed to happen if they
they
just arrested the right person.
Right. And to be honest with you, in these cases, they had forensic evidence that would link Jeremy. And so it's amazing to me that they couldn't put it together and take him off the streets. And when you just see the ripple effect of even in Leo's case, Leo's family, Michelle's family, just dozens of victims out there that, if he'd have been caught and taken off the streets, none of this would have happened.
None of it.
And so you don't hear the police ever talking about that, or the prosecutors ever talking about that, by not doing their jobs right.
They have blood on their hands, literally.
Exactly.
Literally.
And, some of it, I get it. There's unsolved murders out there that are tricky. But to me, these weren't tricky. I mean, he left fingerprints at every murder he committed. And so, well, what's the problem here?
Listeners want to know, is Judge Cupp still involved?
Judge Cupp is still involved. He's very much, Leo's attorney. And yes, he's doing a lot. We've done some speaking events where we go out together and speak. And he's really itching to get more involved. And Judge, you stepped off the bench to help Leo. There's not much more you can really do. You led me to this case to begin with, and then you quit your job. You had years left on the bench to be Leo's lawyer. You've done everything you need to do. But he just feels like he cannot rest until Leo is exonerated. And, I kind of respect that in him. He's got a real bulldog in him,
I love that. That's great. So how can we support Leo? And is there anything else you want us to know about Leo or anything going on in the Bone Valley world?
Yeah, the only thing, Leo does have a GoFundMe page out there. Because of his injuries, he can't work. And so he was working as a mechanic in an auto shop, and those days are gone. So he may have an assistant pastor position that's coming his way, which I think he'd be ideal for. He's a great speaker. But, I just think stay tuned to the Bone Valley world. We'll the time may come where we need petitions and we need support, and we're just waiting for that day to come.
Have Justin and Jamie listened to the podcast? What do they think about it?
Yeah, and I was really sensitive about this because, it was one of the things that made this story so hard is that once Jamie agreed to talk to us, what were we going to really ask her? And it's about her relationship with Jeremy. Probably the worst 2 years of her life, really. You know,
How old was she then?
she was 17 and 18, and she gets hooked up with Jeremy, who's the same age. And, you know, Jeremy's in and out of jail and, you know, just constantly being violent on the streets. And she's kind of this kid who's like, you know, a good student. She's got a house. She's not homeless like Jeremy, yet she's kind of interested in this world of a new boyfriend. And it's Jeremy, though, you know. And so there's a lot of, you know, abuse that she suffered and a lot of like trauma. And so that was really the hard thing to talk to her about and just make her bring that all out again. And so, you know, I was really concerned about how she might take it because, you know, some of it is just so upsetting. She hasn't talked to anybody about it. But I did talk to her after it came, and she like begrudgingly conceded that she did feel some empathy for Jeremy after all this. And she said, I'm really proud of the way you handled this story. And she goes, I just think like you did a really good job with this, and you were very fair, and you didn't sugarcoat anything, and you didn't shy away from anything. So she was very fine with it. And she just really wants to meet Leo one day, and that's like what everybody tells me. Justin, on the other hand, has listened to 5 episodes, and I think he emotionally is so moved by it that he told me, he goes, I'm not ready to listen to the last episode.
One.
I told him, you're gonna have to like find a quiet place and get away from people and listen to it privately, because it might be a lot for you. Because it was a lot for us just working on it.
Sure.
And I haven't heard back from him on episode 6. So that was a couple weeks ago. So, you know, I think he's going to be fine. He was just so impressed with like Mary and some of the other people in the story who were looking out for his father, including Oscar, who was one of the inmates who was looking out of the field
Have him and
ministry.
Mary spoken?
Yes, they continue to speak. They have a really sweet relationship. I mean, the letters, and you've heard them, but like she's just like this motherly figure to Jeremy, and he really does allow her to play that role in his life. And he also is concerned about her and asks about her, and it's like that was another side of Jeremy that I'd never seen before. Somebody who was like, you know, talking to Mary and telling her, make sure she takes her medicines, make sure you don't work too hard, get some rest, you know, falling into this kind of role like a concerned son. But yeah, and Mary and I have talked about it. Like, you know, I said, look, you've been doing a lot for this, and I don't want to. People are writing to me, and they want to talk to Jeremy. They want to give him money for his canteen. And do you want me to just keep forwarding these to you? And she's like, I'm in this for life. Like, I'm in it. And I was like, that told me everything I needed to know about Mary. Like, she's not going to abandon him. Like, she's going to be there for as long as he needs her.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and I think that was like the beauty of the second season was just, you know, you're really dealing with a really dark story, but on the other hand, you're seeing the best of people caring about each other. And, you know, it was really Justin's words. He said people coming together, caring about people. And I really couldn't have put it, you know, better, and didn't even see that ever coming in the story. But it was from Justin, and that meant a lot to me to just hear it from him.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that people are writing a lot of letters. They want to talk to Jeremy. Has anyone else kind of really stepped in like Mary has?
They haven't really stepped in to do things, but they wanna help him. And I was kind of surprised because it's been mostly women, but there's been some men in there that have been moved enough to say, look, I just feel bad for this guy. I don't want to see him get out of prison. I don't want to be his pen pal like Mary, but I just feel bad. This guy's, you know, undergone so much in his life, and so I just want to give him something and make his life easier. So yeah, and there's been quite a few. You know, honestly, I would say more people have reached out to me about Jeremy than Leo, believe it or not. You know, I think it's probably because Leo has a support system already, and Jeremy doesn't really have much of that. So they don't really need to feel the need to step in and help Leo, but they support him. But yeah, I'm really surprised by it. And I've had like prosecutors and cops even comment on it, saying, you know, I didn't think I could feel bad for this guy, but I really do.
I think it's really groundbreaking. I mean, I think, you know, there's been other shows and stuff. Like one of my favorite shows is I Am a Killer. It's on Netflix. And I've even written some of those people on that show. I just felt so compelled by how tragic their lives were. And yes, they're a murderer, but I did the same thing. I wrote a guy and said, I just saw your story. I just wanted to let you know that I give a shit about you.
Because you're a human being.
Sometimes it's all it takes is to just let someone know that someone cares about
Right.
you.
Right. And I think,
yeah,
just those notes, I mean, even if they're not going to contribute any money, and I understand that's a
just to
little
say
bit
I
to
hear you,
yes.
because you're meant in prison to be locked away and forgotten about,
Right.
right? So to tell them I heard you, I heard your story, means so much.
I know it's meant a lot to Jeremy too. At one point he wrote me a letter and he goes, I'm just going to tell you everything because people seem to listen to you. And he felt like nobody listened to him. They abuse him in court. They call him a liar and, everything. And, he is, for the last 4 years since I know him, he's been trying to do the right thing. He feels horrible that Leo's in prison for a crime that he committed. And he recognizes that the family, Michelle's family, is like suffering because of his actions. And, and also he's let his family down, and he's just recognizing that if I just tell the truth, it's bringing my family back into my life, and it's actually helping a guy who shouldn't be in prison. And so I think people hear that and recognize that there's not much else he can do, but that's one big step towards doing the right thing that should be commended. And I think he feels that. And so I feel really good that he feels some kind of, relief and satisfaction that he's done the right thing. One time he asked me to send, because he can't listen to the podcast,
Right.
but people were saying things to him about it. So he was hearing about it secondhand. And he knew I interviewed him, and he asked if I could send pages from what he'd said to me. And I sent them, and he said, I don't ever want to see those pages again. They're so painful to read, but I just wanted to have something that showed I did the right thing once in my life. And I'm like, boy, how can you really just argue with something like that? So it's from his heart, So.
Do you think there's other things he has not admitted to?
Yeah, there's one case that I'm really slow with this stuff. I've known him for 4 years, and I'm really waiting for the right time. Kind of want to do it in person, but he has the very first murder that he got charged with. He pled not guilty, and they put on a defense that it was somebody else who did it, which is not true. But he hasn't fully, to me, confessed to those details of that. He's confessed to other people, saying that he got away with that one. But to me, he hasn't really explored it yet. And I kind of stopped at that point because I do want to see him in person and have that conversation in person. I don't want to, it's a tricky thing when you're doing this kind of thing. Like, let's go back to another really awful thing you did. I try to temper that with, conversations about his family and the positive things, and mostly with the later murders that I was investigating. But I do want to go back and revisit that because I think it's really important that he talks to me about it in a truthful way, but just sort of take accountability for it. But he's got a lot of bitterness about the person who he accused of doing this. This person showed up at his sentencing and was gloating and was making faces at him in the courtroom, and so he's angry at that guy. So we have to get past that anger phase to get to the truth, I think.
Your relationship with Justin, it feels like you're this kind of father figure in his life, and he's learned so much about himself. Do you think of it that way?
I didn't think about that until you just mentioned that, because I don't know about you, but like I just see everybody's the same age, and so I don't realize, well, I'm a lot older than him. I am a father figure in a lot of ways, so that totally makes sense. But yes, he would sometimes look at me and just like, can you help me? Like those kind of eyes, like I can't do this alone. I need help. And, just even writing to his father was difficult. But I got to say, I did help him with things, and I try to, just respect how difficult this might be. I mentioned this, like, it's not like a 23andMe kind of reunion. This is a guy that, is a murderer, and the son doesn't know what's true. He's heard all these stories about his father killing possibly 11 people, and he wasn't really aware of, who his father was. He'd only heard rumors. Nobody talked about it. And so part of the whole premise of season 2 was that Jamie found it easier to talk to me and Kelsey about this than she did talking to Justin about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so she said, I'll tell you everything, and then he can learn it through you. And so there was this really weird conduit thing that we used.
Did you feel your position in that? Like, I guess that goes back to my question about your role as a storyteller, journalist.
Yeah. It felt really awkward because I felt like, there's a lot of things that can go wrong here. And I don't want to bring him into a situation where, it just, the chaos of Jeremy's life kind of takes over, and he's hurt by this. And so we've talked a lot about that, like trying to prepare him. And I think he had a very realistic view of who his father was. And that was just really me just trying to help him understand that if you want to reach out to your father, that's fine, but you need to know who he is. And I got to tell you all this stuff first. And then you can decide if you still want to go forward with this. Yeah, it's an awkward thing. I've never been in these kind of situations before. So I was really just using intuition a lot. How would I want to be treated in this situation? Right. What do I think could be useful? What's kind of off bounds that I shouldn't be getting into? And just making sure everyone felt comfortable proceeding in this way. And ultimately, we did. We just found a way to make it work, and in a way that I was very comfortable with, ethically getting a little more involved than I think most journalists would get involved in it. But I just felt like this was necessary to the story. It felt more like a documentary where you're embedded with the people. We're not taking sides about like guilt or innocence in this point. It's just like, here's a human being who's suffering. Sure. He is trying to help me with some of the cold cases that were unsolved that he's claimed responsibility for. But there was really no issue with that. He was very happy to talk about that stuff with me about it. And so I didn't ever feel like I was like abusing my position. Like, okay, I'm sending you those books, so start giving me murders. It never really got that. I felt like we were always very honest. And there were times you just say, I don't want to talk about this anymore, and we'd stop. This is respecting those kind of things, because it's more important about people's feelings and their mental health than I think the story. So,
what would you say to people who, say you're giving a murderer a platform? What about victims? We don't give a shit about this guy. Why are we hearing a whole story about a murderer?
Yeah, I mean, those are questions I ask myself. Like, why are we doing this? What are we doing? And it wasn't until a long time we were into this that we were still thinking, I don't know if we have this. It doesn't seem to be going in an interesting place. And then a few things started to develop, mostly around Justin and Justin's mood and a willingness to go further. But I feel like I'm not really just trying to create sympathy for Jeremy, because that's not really what I'm trying to do. I am trying to get him charged for murders, actually, and he knows that. He told me, I can be charged for this, but that's okay. Let's keep talking. So he knows I'm talking to law enforcement, and that my ultimate thing is to see him charged for the murders he committed. But with that said, I don't want to see him like suffer hardship because of, my investigation. Granted, he's never getting out of prison, so I don't think they're going to try him, to be honest with you. I think he would sign something, but he can get transferred back to a county for 3 months, come off his meds, be placed in a psych cell. And, last time that happened with one of Leo's cases, like the sheriff's deputies like beat the hell out of him. And like, I don't want to have that on my conscience, like, all my work investigating, and now Jeremy gets put in a really bad situation that leads to harm. So I have conflicted feelings about it, but the right thing to do is he needs to be held accountable for the murders that he's committed, that he's admitted to committing, and the people who have been tossed under the bus like Dan Odie and Leo need to be fully exonerated. And so that's sort of the position I'm in. But I never felt like I was giving him a platform to speak about, because he didn't really have any issues. He was just really just talking to me, and I don't think he's really trying to get anything out of anybody, except he wants to meet his family. He wants family in his life.
Well, for me, I feel like the importance of this season, again, just shows that I think it kind of shows why it's important to understand Jeremy, because then we know how we got here, right? We know in some cases how this, quote, monster is made. And by understanding that, we can prevent that, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. Like, there was something that the judge said of Jeremy when he first got arrested for murder at age 15. He dealt with Jeremy like a lot in the juvenile system, and he just said, I don't think anybody's surprised to see Jeremy Scott here in this court charged with murder. Like, there was nothing anybody could do about that. Like, he'd been put in juvenile detention facilities.
Could anyone have intervened? Like, was there a point in his life someone could have intervened and we wouldn't be here?
I think it would have been asking a lot. Like, he literally was homeless at 9. Yeah. He was out on the streets committing crimes at age 9. His first arrest was at 10. I think, and also he had like a traumatic head injury, which also affected him. So he's got like a low IQ, like in the 70s. He's got brain damage. He was abusing drugs and alcohol like before he was a teenager. Um, and his family really wasn't there for him. So I don't know who else would have been there to point him. He didn't really do very well in school, was in and out of school. Uh, I think there could have been things like if somebody in a juvenile detention center had come across him and maybe taken some interest, or maybe a foster family, but it just seemed like this inevitable path that he was leading towards as he was getting more and more violent, more and more desperate on the streets. But yes, could something have been done? Yes, social programs, those are things I don't really feel qualified to talk about that part of the system, but I recognize it's something that you got to give kids some kind of chance, even people like Jeremy, because the damage that they can do. Just go and ask the dozens and dozens of victims of his violence. Do they think something could have been done or should have been done? The first thing they'll say is yes. That would have been great if we could have prevented this. Because Justin had grown up constantly hearing, you're not your father, you're not your father. When he had a temper tantrum or something like that, he worried about, am I carrying the DNA of a person who's killed a bunch of people? And so he was afraid of that. And, at the end, Jamie sort of acknowledged, she said, Jeremy had a charming side. He had a sweet side. He had compassion, which, if you listen to the podcast, you can feel it. He does have it. You can see it. He's not the monster that, he's done evil things, but he's not the monster you imagine when you think of.
Leo even said that too. Yes. He wanted a villain. He wanted someone he could just like seethe and hate, and
right.
That's not him.
Right. And the first time he saw Jeremy, he's like, it's not that guy. He felt sorry for him. And I think a lot of people do feel sorry for him. But Jamie, finally acknowledged that, he is his father, but he's the good side of Jeremy. And, having spent a lot of time on the phone and talking to Jeremy, I did see that good side. There was no doubt, I'm sure there are people who don't have a good side, but he's not one of them. He's remorseful. All the remorse that the state expects Leo to show, well, Leo's got a claim of innocence. He's never shown the remorse. Jeremy's showing that remorse all the time. He constantly talks about the victims and the people he's hurt, and he gets emotional about it. And I think, Jamie saying that made Justin sort of acknowledge it and accept it. And, he said, I am my father. I look exactly like my father. I have the same eyes. We have a very similar voice. I was listening to the tape of Jeremy at this, as a teenager, confessing to police, and, he sounded exactly like Justin. It was really weird. And to hear Jamie talk about that, saying, as he grew up, seeing him, wondering, oh my God, she said, I get chills because it looked like I was looking at Jeremy. And you can imagine somebody like that who's been thrown into a police car, accused of murder and beaten by Jeremy and all these things, it would be traumatic. And, but for her to acknowledge, that Justin carried the good side of Jeremy, and I think that's, hopefully that's Jeremy's greatest legacy, is that his son went on to be this beautiful person. And I really mean this sincerely. I call him a kid. Everybody calls him a kid. He's 35, but he feels like a kid a lot of times when you're talking to him. And, he just says some really profound things about forgiveness and acceptance that, there's a lot of people in this story that can make me cry, but he's one of them automatically. He shows the same kind of grace that I think Leo shows in a lot of this story. And I'm just really honored to know him, because when I first met him, I thought, who's this crazy kid? Now it's Jeremy Scott's son who's going to reach out to me. And he was nothing like I expected.
Wow.
And I really think so highly of him. And I love talking to him and catching up with him. And he's a hugger. And it's just such a sweet thing to see him around.
He looks like Jeremy. I was not expecting him to look like Jeremy.
Yeah, he really looks a lot like him.
I have to see a picture. Gilbert King, you are doing the Lord's work, so thank you.
Well, thanks, Maggie. It's always a pleasure talking.